Judy Garland, that powerhouse performer whose voice and presence have enchanted audiences for generations. The name Judy Garland itself instantly conjures up a swirl of bright technicolor images, prancing down a yellow brick road, belting out timeless tunes in sequined gowns, bringing a sweet vulnerability to the big screen. But behind the glitter, behind the wide eyes and effortless grace, there was a darker undercurrent shaped by childhood scandals, ruthless studios, and personal struggles that took her from dizzying highs to heartbreaking lows. Born on June 10, 1922, into a family of vaudeville performers, the little girl, originally named Frances Ethel Gum, was destined for the stage whether she wanted it or not. Her parents were both seasoned showbiz folks who wasted no time thrusting their youngest daughter into the limelight. Even as a toddler, she performed alongside her two older sisters, Mary Jane and Virginia, at their father's movie theater. In the beginning, one might have called her a natural gamely singing and dancing, but she was still the baby of the family, so it's impossible to imagine she understood the ramifications of life in the entertainment world. Then came a scandal that rocked her family. Disturbing rumors began to circulate that her father had inappropriate relations with young boys. It was a dark revelation, and not surprisingly, the uproar forced them to pack up and move in search of a fresh start. Yet it didn't solve much. Even though they began performing again in Lancaster, the seeds of heartbreak had been planted. Frances watched her parents' marriage crumble. Still, she found no respite from her mother Ethel, who became determined to transform her daughters into stars. Somewhere in there, little Frances discovered that her childhood would never be typical. To make matters worse, Ethel's pushy tactics escalated into something downright dangerous. Faced with the insane scheduling demands of show business, she started handing her daughter pills to wake her up in the morning and different pills to help her sleep at night. This was Frances's introduction to the addictive substances that would continue to haunt her throughout her adulthood. Ethel was so unforgiving in her methods that Judy would later call her own mother the real wicked witch of the West. It's heartbreaking to think of a little girl, still in her single digits, being pulled this way and that, hopped up on uppers, sedated by sleeping pills, and regarded mostly as a commodity. By the time Frances was getting a bit older, she and her sisters performed under the name the Gum Sisters. Unfortunately, Gum didn't have quite the right ring for showbiz. There's a story about a Chicago theater accidentally billing them as the Glum Sisters, which was humiliating. Deciding a better brand might open doors, they switched to the Garland Sisters. And then came the moment that changed the trajectory of Frances's entire life. She renamed herself Judy, inspired by the Hoagie Carmichael song of the same name, Judy Garland. Now that was a name that sounded like it belonged in bright lights. Sure enough, one night during a Garland Sisters gig at the Orpheum Theater, songwriter Burton Lane spotted her. He was there on behalf of Louis B. Mayer, the formidable head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM. Lane reported back that Garland was unlike anyone he'd seen. In no time, a life-altering audition at MGM sealed her fate. It's been said they signed her on the spot, with no screen test, blown away by her huge singing voice that seemed bizarrely adult for a 13-year-old. Problem was, MGM couldn't quite figure out how to categorize her. At 13, she wasn't exactly a cute kid star, but she was also too young to put into the mature, leading lady roles. Nor did she fit the bombshell mold of other starlets who towered over her. She was barely 4 feet 11 and a half, a tiny wisp of a thing who they labeled the girl next door. Rather than celebrate her distinctive look, MGM executives kept reminding her how she didn't fit their glamorous blueprint. The worst example might have been how Louis B. Mayer himself would lovingly call her his little hunchback. Between that and the constant comparisons to stunners like Ava Gardner and Elizabeth Taylor, Judy's self-esteem took a beating. If we think Hollywood is tough now, the 1930s and 1940s were absolute shark tanks. Early on, Judy was forced to wear caps on her teeth and had her nose altered with rubber discs. Executives wanted to refine her face, smoothing out any perceived imperfection so she could pass for the ideal star. The studio also insisted on controlling her diet. She was heavily scrutinized for her weight, so heavily, in fact, they sometimes limited her to nothing but soup and lettuce. From the outside, it's easy to see how destructive that was. It would only deepen Judy's insecurities, setting her on a collision course with more dangerous forms of self-medication. But she was young, desperate to succeed, and had no real adult advocate in her corner telling her it was time to push back. The heartbreaks only mounted from there. At 13, she lost her father to meningitis. She received the grim news right before one of her first major radio performances. He reportedly listened to her on the radio from his hospital bed, passing away the next morning. She was devastated, but life at MGM didn't pause for grief. They had big plans for their rising star, pushing her into projects with the same rigors that had already begun to unravel her nerves. In those early years, she became close to fellow teenage actor Mickey Rooney. She developed a huge crush on him, but the feelings weren't mutual. She had to stand by, heart in hand, while Rooney flirted with every other girl in Hollywood. Ironically, the pair played sweethearts in a series of back-to-back backyard musicals, but in real life, nothing blossomed. That romantic disappointment might have hurt, but it was far from the worst thing going on in her life. She later admitted that studios doled out amphetamines and barbiturates to keep performers going through the day and calm them down at night. It was an open secret, and for Judy, it only echoed the pattern her mother had started fueling a growing reliance on pills. Then came The Wizard of Oz. The role of Dorothy Gale is likely the single most iconic performance of Judy Garland's career, and it's hard to imagine anyone else belting out Over the Rainbow. But MGM had considered Shirley Temple at first, then Deanna Durbin. Judy only got the role after those plans fell through. The irony is that no one else could have done Dorothy justice, not in the same heart-rending, timeless way. It's the role that catapulted her into cinematic immortality, but on set, she faced humiliations that never made it to the screen. Years later, one of her ex-husbands claimed that some of the male actors playing Munchkins harassed her by sliding their hands under her dress. She was only 16. Add to that the controlling approach the studio took to her body, forcing her to wear a restrictive gingham dress that downplayed any curves and scheduling rigorous exercises to keep her figure as childlike as possible. The end product was a masterpiece, but Garland left that set with more psychic bruises than most people realize. At least the performance garnered her real critical recognition. In 1939, she received a special Juvenile Academy Award for her turns in The Wizard of Oz and Babes in Arms. Now, with the 1940s looming, the studio began casting her in more adult roles. That was a tricky transition. Judy was no longer the pigtail-wearing Dorothy Gale, and Hollywood wasn't sure what to do with her. She played her first real adult character in Little Nellie Kelly, which required an accent, a death scene, and her first on-screen kiss, a moment so awkward that her co-star, George Murphy, likened the experience to a hillbilly with a child bride. If that's not humiliating enough, she then endured real-life heartbreak when musician Artie Shaw jilted her to marry Lana Turner. At barely 18 years old, that kind of heartbreak must have felt enormous. She quickly found herself in another complicated romance with David Rose, who was already married. They were forced to wait for his divorce to become final, and the studio was less than thrilled that one of their young stars was engaged to an older, previously married man. It was one more area of life where Judy lacked control. When she did tie the knot with Rose, she soon became pregnant, an event that should have been a turning point of joy. But again, control reared its ugly head. The combined forces of her mother and MGM made sure that pregnancy never came to term. Rumor has it they wanted to protect her image. She was still the naive, innocent star. Could audiences accept a pregnant Judy Garland? She ended up getting more than one forced abortion before the decade was done. That alone would be traumatizing enough for anyone. Her personal life became a labyrinth of regrets, heartbreaks, and thwarted desires. Sensing that she'd never find personal stability in that relationship, Judy divorced David Rose. Not long after, she starred in Meet Me in St. Louis, directed by Vincente Minnelli. This film was a pivotal moment both for her career and her self-image. Gone were the childish frills. For once, someone in a position of power saw Garland's potential as a sophisticated leading lady. The film's makeup artist, Dorothy Ponadell, famously removed Judy's prosthetics and caps, restyled her hairline and brows, and gave her a glamorous look that was far from the little girl next door. The result astonished Judy. Finally, she recognized that she could be beautiful. She and Minnelli clashed at first, both artistically and personally, but sparks of another kind flew. They married in 1945. That union gave her something she'd never had before, the chance to keep a baby. Their daughter Liza Minnelli was born in 1946, and of course Liza would later become a legendary performer in her own right. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Judy was a new mother, freshly in love and recognized as a serious actress for the first time. But the toxic pattern she'd developed since childhood had followed her into marriage number 2, and by the late 1940s, her anxieties and depression were in full force. It's well documented that she had multiple breakdowns, one of the most harrowing taking place while filming The Pirate in 1948. She was overwhelmed, had spent years battling her insecurities, and was addicted to a myriad of prescription drugs that left her mentally and physically brittle. She suffered a nervous breakdown, went to a sanatorium, returned to set, but the damage was done. The film tanked and she spiraled further. Then came a particularly frightening moment. In July of that same year, she attempted to end her life by cutting her wrists with broken glass. The cuts were minor, but the attempt underscored how desperate she felt. She underwent a brief stay in a psychiatric hospital. Few could blame her for trying to escape the relentless demands of stardom. This cycle, make a movie, do well or flop, break down, try to recover, was repeated time and again. Summer Stock in 1950 was the last straw. MGM had had enough of the production delays and personal issues. When she was cast in Royal Wedding opposite Fred Astaire, she repeatedly missed work, and they finally suspended her. She made another serious self-harm attempt shortly after, also with broken glass. The resulting negative press, combined with the studio's fed-up attitude, ended her long tenure with MGM. 15 years of stardom, and it all collapsed under the weight of her personal anguish. Her marriage to Minnelli crumbled soon after. They'd had an odd dynamic. There were rumors Minnelli was gay, and certainly Judy's mental struggles tested any notion of marital bliss. By 1951, divorced, out of contract, and nearly broke, Judy had to find a path forward. Salvation came from an unexpected source, Bing Crosby. Sensing her desperation, Crosby invited her onto his radio show. She was terrified, certain that audiences would judge her for her public breakdowns. But Crosby offered her a comforting introduction, basically telling the audience, let's give Judy the love and support she needs right now. She walked out on stage, voice trembling, heart pounding, and delivered a triumphant performance that made it clear she still had that star power. She began making regular appearances on Crosby's show. That led to a series of live concerts from 1951 to 1952, culminating in her now legendary run at London's Palladium and the Palace Theatre in Manhattan. Critics called it one of the greatest comebacks in entertainment history. Judy described it herself as a rebirth. She was no longer shackled to a controlling studio. She could plan her own shows, pick her own songs, connect directly with her audience. It was liberating and profitable. During this period, she found new love with Sidney Luft, a man who seemed to share her passion for the spotlight. In 1952, they got married, her third time, and had a daughter, Lorna, and later a son, Joey. Luft became her manager and producer, guiding her next big project, the 1954 remake of A Star is Born. It was a big swing to reestablish her reputation in Hollywood. While the production soared creatively, her performance was mesmerizing. The costs ballooned, and she again slipped into old patterns, missing days of shooting. The movie's final budget soared, and though it did well at the box office, it wasn't enough to recoup its massive expenses. It did, however, garner her a Best Actress Oscar nomination, which many assumed she'd win. Even a camera crew waited by her hospital bed. She'd just delivered her son to capture her acceptance speech. Then Grace Kelly's name was called instead, and the cameras packed up in silence. Groucho Marx famously called Judy's snub the biggest robbery since Brinks. As the 1950s rolled into the 1960s, Judy's health issues, especially with her liver, became severe. Doctors gave her a grim diagnosis. She might only have 5 years left to live, and she might never sing again. Strangely, this was almost a relief to her. She felt like the constant pressure of show business was off. Maybe she could at least savor the time she had left. But her unstoppable spirit surprised the doctors. She got back on stage, and for a while she managed to perform with that same fiery magnetism audiences loved. And yes, doctors had been wrong. She could still sing like nobody's business. Despite her intermittent professional successes, Judy's personal life continued to be a roller coaster. Her spending habits, combined with messy financial decisions, landed her with staggering debts to the IRS. She sold houses at a loss, and her lucrative concert engagements were often garnished by tax collectors. Her marriage to Luft, once so full of promise, became toxic. She filed for divorce multiple times before it stuck. She accused him of abusing her, both physically and mentally. He claimed self-defense. The situation was chaotic and ugly. Eventually, she did break free from him, though the settlement left her finances even more precarious. Professionally, she tried out her own weekly variety series, The Judy Garland Show, on television in 1963. Despite some wonderful moments that showcased her comedic timing and that legendary singing voice, the show struggled to find ratings. It was canceled after just one season, leaving her finances and morale depleted. Yet she still performed at prestigious venues and garnered standing ovations from audiences who recognized that, for all her personal demons, her talent was undiminished. During one set of concerts in Australia, she arrived on stage an hour late and exhibited odd behavior, spurring a frustrated crowd to boo her. She left in tears, calling them brutish. Perhaps they were, but it illustrated that fans were tired of the drama, wanting the old Judy they once knew. Her final years included short-lived relationships. One was with actor Glenn Ford, who apparently couldn't commit. Another was with Mark Herron, who she sort of married, while still technically wed to Luft, leading to a complicated annulment process. Herron, too, was accused by Judy of violence, though he claimed it was self-defense. These betrayals and heartbreaks chipped away at any sense of stability she had left. By 1966, Judy Garland met Mickey Deans, who would become her fifth husband. They had a weird first encounter. He showed up at her hotel to deliver a package of amphetamines. With her kids in the room, he pretended to be a doctor. It was an odd beginning, but they started a relationship that saw them occasionally break up and reconcile. In 1969, with Judy financially and emotionally battered, they finally made it official and married in London. However, she was undeniably nearing her end. The long-standing abuse her body had endured, from pills to alcohol to the mental toll of constant performance, was shutting her down. On June 22, 1969, Judy Garland was found dead in the bathroom of her rented home in London. She was only 47. The official cause was an accidental overdose of barbiturates. Some said she also had cirrhosis, but the coroner stated her organs showed little sign of that. In any case, the unstoppable cycle that began when she was a child, a cycle of exhaustion, diet pills, sleeping pills, emotional strain, had finally claimed her life. Overnight, the news shattered fans worldwide, who still pictured her as that youthful Dorothy Gale or that enthralling concert performer. Her funeral in New York drew crowds of devastated admirers, and she was eventually laid to rest, first in New York and later reinterred in Los Angeles. In death, Judy Garland became a legend, and the tragic outline of her life story fascinated future generations. How could the same woman who brought joy to millions have suffered so consistently behind the scenes? How did someone with that much raw talent become so consumed by heartbreak and addiction? The glimpses we get of her wry humor, she once quipped about being fed all those pills as a teen, remind us she was well aware of the injustices forced upon her. As the decades marched on, historians, fans, and critics have re-examined her life and recognized how the studio system systematically exploited and discarded her, using her star power for profit without ever granting her the same respect as her leading man co-stars or her more conventional female peers. And yet her artistry remains monumental. One only has to listen to Over the Rainbow to experience the shimmering vulnerability and unshakable longing in her voice. Words made even more poignant if you know she was just a teenage girl with a messed up childhood, singing that she dreamed of a place where troubles melt like lemon drops. Maybe that's part of the magic. The Wizard of Oz soared because she lent Dorothy a sincerity that no other performer could. That sincerity, ironically, came from the very real pain that was building in her life. Her influence on American pop culture is staggering. She was the first woman to win the Album of the Year Grammy for Judy at Carnegie Hall in 1961. She was beloved by Broadway legends, Hollywood royalty, and later by the LGBTQ+ community, who embraced her as an icon of endurance, individuality, and heartbreak. There's even a colloquial legend that her funeral inadvertently sparked the events of the Stonewall riots in 1969, though that's more a piece of cultural lore than strictly documented fact. Nevertheless, she's become a symbol of perseverance in the face of oppression. In the end, what remains is the undeniable stamp she left on popular culture. One might say her spirit lives on in every heartfelt ballad, every powerful performer who takes the stage, and every star who's been crushed under the intense spotlight. The rawness of her life story shines a harsh light on how show business can devour its brightest talents, but her vibrant performances remind us of the joy she was capable of bringing to the world. Maybe that's how she'd want to be remembered. Not as a perpetual victim, but as a woman who yearned to entertain, who had a voice that soared across octaves and soared into hearts, and who, in her short time, changed the face of musical film and stage performance forever.